Hi all, good morning to the session today. So this session is basically for the CISA, Certified Information Systems Auditor, and we'll be discussing on the question and answers and basically on how to approach the exam questions. This is in line with the ISACA's thought process, how you need to approach a question, how you need to answer a question while you are taking the real exam. So we'll be having the questions taken from the CRM as an extract, and we'll be discussing in detail what is the mode of a thought process that you need to inculcate while you are preparing for the exam as well as when you are in exam. So if I start off with, we'll have this, the agenda would be the small introduction about myself and you, and I'll tell a brief note on how you need to approach CISA questions, and we'll be discussing domain 1 to 5 questions and how we need to think like an IS auditor. That will be going in line with the 1 to 5 domain questions that we are discussing. That will be in parallel, and a final Q&A will be like for you all to openly ask some questions regarding CISA. That is the end of the session. So the introduction about myself is that my name is Krishnan Ramani. I think some of you would have seen me in LinkedIn. So I'm an information security and an IT audit expert with a total of 13 years experience into IT auditing, information security domain, out of which 8 years is corely dedicated. I have a wide variety of experience in IT audits, IT security, GRC, ITGC, and IT strategy, security strategy. So my certifications are CISSP, CISA, for which I was a chapter rank holder, first rank holder, and CEH, which is the Certified Ethical Hacking version 10, and I'm a Lean Six Sigma Black Belt certified, and I have done business analytics, and I'm also into Certified Cybercrime Intervening Officer. So let us start with this thought process, like why we are coming for CISA. Like, let me pause here for a moment. So why, what is the objective? So there is a practical relevance, right? So every detail given in the CRM book, which is the CISA review manual, there is a practical relevance for you to do, and while you are working as an IS auditor or an IT auditor, even when you are working as an ITGC person, which is the general controls, and any line of defense from TRM or TRC, technology risk management and everything. So probably what happens is there is a pure practical relevance in terms of, understanding these controls, what is IT audit is all about, how do we preserve things, how do we maintain stuffs, what are all the things. Because as an IS auditor, you will be reading this book. But once when it comes to the implementation part as well, there are a lot of clues that has been given in the book in terms of, how do you preserve stuff so that, it will be good for an audit and everything. So in that mode, it is very relevant to the present day world, and as we see, the technology is also emerging at this point in time. So today there is something called cloud, tomorrow there will be something, a new technology will be arriving, and everything will be changing overnight. So but what we need to do is the fundamentals remain the same. So what are all the things that we are going to see, what are all the things that we are going to look whenever we are auditing, or as whenever we are performing the role of information security analyst or any other thing. But this book is purely purely focused on the IS auditor side of things. So the prism of optics is purely from the IS auditor point of view, because the moment you start thinking as, like IS security analyst for this exam, that will not be the correct thing that we will be doing. So what we need to approach, how we need to approach, and what we need to do is exactly what I'm going to tell here. So the questions will be, each question has a STEM question, which will be a basic question, which will be having 4 options. Choose the correct or the best option. So as I was telling, so the scenarios will be completely, related to the IS audit scenarios. You will be presented a situation. You will need to think like an IS auditor and answer like an IS auditor. So there are some helpful instances where you can, how you will be approaching. So every questions will be, most of the questions, not every questions, will be having something called, the best, most, and these kind of wordings will be definitely there. So you need to understand what they are asking in the question, because the moment they say choose for the best option, choose for the most relevant option, choose for the primary option, choose for the first option, so it means that two or more options that has been given are right in the context of the question, but only one thing can be the best, only one thing can be the primary, only one thing can be the first. So you need to choose the answers accordingly. So say for an example, if there is a given scenario of BCP process, how it comes, the business impact analysis and everything. So once you start the question, you need to know what are all the steps involved in the BCP process. How do you, conduct the business impact analysis? How do you identify the business? How do you, this step-by-step process is definitely essential in order for you to understand what is the first most option that the IS auditor will be choosing. But it will not be as straightforward as, what is the first option in the BCP. There will be a presentation in terms of a scenario given. So you need to understand the scenario and you need to answer accordingly. So read all the options and read the stem again if you can eliminate two options. So that is very important. Read all the options and so if you can eliminate two options, that will be great. So in the context of, the question and answers in multiple choice questions, there is always a method called elimination method, right? So in terms of, how do you answer a question, elimination method is really a good method to start with, because once you start eliminating two incorrect answers, so you will have a 50% chance of clearing the exam or clearing the particular, question correctly, because what you have is an 100%, and out of which, you have already eliminated two irrelevant answers. In most of the cases, two irrelevant answers will be definitely visible. Once you have read the CRM and you have answered sufficient number of questions, you will be able to identify what are the two irrelevant answers, and you will be able to straight away eliminate it and focus your time and efforts only on the two which is being most relevant for the particular context. So reread the remaining options and bring in any personal experience that you may have to determine. So the bringing the personal experience, I would say it is with a caveat, because in terms of bringing your personal experience, sometimes what happens is you need to think like an IS auditor from ISACA's point of view. So the moment you start thinking from your company's point of view, probably some of you would have had a seasoned experience in terms of doing the IS audit and the IT auditing or whatever, the security or whatever. But the moment you start thinking from your company's perspective, things might go little bit wrong, because of the fact that the companies or the organizations, they actually tailor the controls according to their requirement and they customize it, which in case is not in ISACA's point of view, because ISACA's point of view is more of I would call it as more raw, because it is a theoretical and a practical knowledge of how you need to apply, but it is not in any specific contextual based or organization based controls, because banking will be having a different set of approach towards the same control, and another industry will be having, healthcare for that matter, will be having a different approach to the same control. So think like an IS auditor. Of course, a little bit of 10% of your work experience also, that is a logical mind that will also help. But don't, in my best opinion, I would suggest that, let's not, think that over the board and think like 100% as an IT auditor, because we'll be having a specific industry experience wherein the controls might be having a different approach, and sometimes the answers can go incorrect. So the next thing is that the domain one question. So first question is, so which of the following outlines the overall authority to perform an IS audit? The audit scope with the goals and objectives, a request form in the form of management to perform an audit, C, an audit charter, D, an approved audit schedule. I think this is very easy question. I think what defines the overall authority? I think the chapter one, the domain one, gives you very decent information on the overall authority, because once you see the question authority, the answer is always the approved charter, because let's look at the reasoning. The audit scope is specific to a single audit and it does not grant authority to perform an audit. B, the request form management to perform an audit is not sufficient because it relates to specific audit. The approved audit charter outlines the auditor's responsibility, authority and accountability. So as I told, this is the only document which gives you an end-to-end perspective on what it is for an auditor, why the auditor is there, what is the authority that the auditor is having, what are all the things that the auditor can do. So everything is given or entitled in one document. That is the reason we need to have selected option C. The approved audit schedule does not grant the authority. The whole point is why this was a very easy question, but again, so the point of this question is to give you a perspective on what you need to look into a question. So when you start looking into a question, so let me tell you what is very important. If you see over here, so the overall authority over here, right? I mean, that is the key word, because every question even in the exam will be having some kind of a key word that defines the answer correctly, because as I told, you need to eliminate two things. So in this, I will be eliminating a request form, which is definitely not an overall authority, and an approved audit schedule. Audit schedule is only in terms of, what is the timeline that they are going to work on, when they are going to carry on the planning work, when they are going to carry on the field work, when the reporting is going to be done, what is the timeline for remediation and all those stuff. But in terms of a request form, that is in terms of just defining what is the management is going to look out for, and a kind of a permission letter or something of that sort. But the two options, again, as I told, the closest that relates to this question will be the option A and option C, because once I say that option A, but again, as I told, the overall authority is the word that defines in terms of what is going to be primary thing that you're going to look out for over here. So the next question. So in performing a risk-based audit, which risk assessment is completed first by an IS auditor? So detection risk assessment, control risk assessment, inherent risk assessment, and fraud risk assessment. So again, the question is very clear in terms of what an IS auditor, which risk assessment comes in the first. Okay, let's look at the correct answer now. So the correct answer is actually inherent risk assessment. So why inherent risk assessment is important? So let us look at the reasons over here. So detection a risk assessment is performed only after the inherent risk. So as again I told, the stepwise answer is very important, right? What is the first? What is the first? So you need to know which is going to come in the first order, which is going to come in the second order. Okay, so the detection risk assessment is performed only after the inherent risk and the control risk assessment have been performed. So definitely this answer can be eliminated. And control risk assessment is performed after the inherent risk assessment has been completed, and it is to determine the level of risk that remains after the controls have been applied. So say for an example, this control risk assessment is right. So it is going to give you kind of what is left over, right? So even after applying all the controls, what is the risk that is going to remain? And that option D, the fraud risk assessment, or a subset of control risk assessment. It is important, but again, it is not as important or the first task of the inherent risk, because whenever you take any process for that matter, there will be a form of inherent risk, which has to be taken into consideration before doing anything. Because inherent risk exists independently of an audit and can occur because of the nature of the business. To successfully conduct an audit, it is important to be aware of the related business processes. To perform the audit, an IS auditor needs to understand the business processes. By understanding the business process, an IS auditor better understands the inherent risk. So, inherent risk gives you an overall idea. Say for an example, if the IS auditor is performing an inherent risk, an audit in a banking sector, they will be having certain sets of inherent risk according to them. And if they are doing some kind of audits in the health sector, they will be again having some set of, inherent risk in that particular sector. So that is the reason we need to know the inherent risk of that particular industry or the particular business process that they are performing. Then they come into the process of fraud risk or the control risk, which is the second or third option that will be. So again, as I told, the logic behind the question is that to understand which comes first, right? And so also one of the other key things that is very important when you are preparing for the exam, not only from the exam standpoint of view, I would suggest everybody to, so what happens is, once you know the answer is correct, check the reason why you have selected that answer and why it is correct. Because 90% of the time you might have selected an answer for some other reason, but it happens to be coincidentally correct with the ISACA. But what I require everybody to do is that, you need to check the thinking process of ISACA. That is very important in terms of, understanding the concepts. And also, even if you have made the answer correct, I would require you to check, every options available, A, B, C, and D, why it is not correct and why the answer that you have chosen is correct. Even in case if you have not selected the correct answer, please still go and check all these options, why the answer that you have selected is not the correct answer and why the other answer remains the correct option. So this question is again an interesting question. So as an IS auditor is performing a review of an application's control fields, finds a weakness in the software system and could materially impact the application. In this situation, an IS auditor should, again, this is not a question, this is just a statement, right? We need to complete this statement. Disregard these controls weakness because the system software review is beyond the scope of this review. Conduct a detailed system software review and report the control weakness. Include in the report statement that the audit was limited to review the application's control weakness. Review the system software controls as relevant and recommend a detailed system software review. I think everyone is going with the option of B, but sorry to disappoint, the answer is actually D. Before going into the complete detailed review as given here, the appropriate option would be to review the system software as relevant to the review and recommend a detailed system software review for which an additional resources may be recommended. So the answer might be extremely similar to what B is, but the difference is that you need to know where your scope is going to go and how you're going to plan the audit accordingly. So that is what is the defining moment for answer B and answer B. So again, answer A and answer C is completely irrelevant. You can take it off the radar. Definitely, nobody has given answer A or C. That is a good sign, because as I told, we need to eliminate these two options very clearly in terms of, how we are going to understand this whole thing. So which of the following is the most important reason why an audit planning process should be reviewed at a periodic intervals? To plan for a deployment of available audit resources, to consider changes to the risk environment, to provide inputs for the documentation of audit charter, to identify applicable IS standards. So again, the answer is B. Let us look at the explanation that's given over here. So short-term and long-term issues drive the audit planning, can be heavily impacted to the changes in the risk environment. So technologies, business processes of the enterprise. This is well said, right? In terms of the risk environment changes quite dynamically, right, for some businesses. So what might be considered as a risk today might not be risk tomorrow. What might be not considered as a risk today will be a risk tomorrow. So in terms of planning for the document of available resources is determined by the audit assignments plan. The option A is completely not relevant. Again, the option C is, something is a mandate from the top management, right? It is not something, the risk assessment or any kind of things is not going to, planning is not going to have any impact on the audit charter, because it's a top management mandate. And the applicability of IS standards, guidelines and procedures is universal to any audit engagement. It is not specific to any audit and not influenced by the short-term and long-term issues. Again, when I talk about short-term and long-term issues, right, so probably we might be having some IT deployment happening, so which might change the risk posture. And classic example is the COVID, right? So in COVID, people are working from home. The risk environment changes from being in the office space to home space. What are all the risk environment that is going to happen. So if anybody has access to printers, say for an example, a person might be connecting their home printer to their laptop or PC to print some confidential documents. So the risk posture is completely changing. So that is the reason why we need to have planning that needs to be detailed than before the audit. So which of the following is the most effective for implementing control self-assessment within small business unit? Informal peer reviews, facilitated workshops, process flow narratives, data flow diagrams. So say for an example, so I'll tell you the correct answer, which is B. So when we are going, the answer reasoning over here, let me not explain it, but I'll give you a different perspective over here. Out of the 4 options, actually, I feel that 3 are actually correct for this particular question, because not at 2, but 3 are correct. But which is the most important when you say is that, the facilitated workshop comes into the mind, because of a very simple fact. Because the control self-assessments are not performed by a seasoned auditor or by a seasoned control people. They are being performed by the business themselves directly to assess how the control posture is there, how the risk posture is, everything. So what happens here is, you need to train them. We have to train them correctly to identify what they are supposed to do, how they are supposed to check for control weakness, and how they are going to report it. And that is by far the most effective way. But again, the process flow diagrams is important. While doing the facilitated workshops, there will be process flow diagrams and data flow diagrams and narratives. These things are very important in terms of, to give more added perspective. But again, that is not the only thing that is required over here. What we require over here is in terms of, identifying the most best option. So the next question, right? So which of the following would an IS auditor perform the first when planning an IS audit? Define the audit deliverables, finalize the scope and the audit objectives, gain an understanding of business objectives and purpose, develop the audit approach or the strategy. The C is correct answer, gain an understanding of business objectives and purpose. So the reason is very simple, right? So what we need to understand in terms of business mission, objectives, purpose, which in turn is, identifies to the policies, standards, guidelines, procedures, everything, right? So because it is very important to gain an understanding of business. Say for an example, if we are in a pen drive manufacturing company, their core mission is to, manufacture pen drive and test pen drive and use pen drive, right? And you cannot say that, the use of pen drive or external drives is prohibited inside the organization. That will be the most absurd thing, right? And in Facebook, if you're auditing Facebook, you cannot go and say that, viewing Facebook inside the Facebook office is restricted. Of course, it can be limited, to view and, to view your personal account. But it will be so absurd when we say all these things inside the office that they are trying to work on, right? So that can be an explanation that can be given to this answer. But again, I would like everyone to go through the other options as well. Defining the audit deliverables is an independent, is dependent upon thorough understanding of business objects, A, B, and D. Because, as I told, every option is important. Though it may not be relevant to this particular question, some other question that might be relevant to this particular option will be arising tomorrow. So the last question in the domain 1 is again the next question. An organization performs a daily backup of critical data and software files and stores in the backup tapes at an offsite location. The backup tapes are used to restore the software and in case of disruption. This is an example of a preventive control, management control, corrective control, and reactive control. The correct answer is actually C. So you cannot avert a particular disaster being happening, right? If you can avert that particular disaster being happening, that is a preventive control. But a corrective control is that, a BCP is a critical, a DRP and a BCP are the best examples that I can give over here. It is actually a corrective control. It's not a preventive control. So, say for an example, couple of years Chennai floods happened, right, in 2015. That cannot be averted. And the pandemic, right now we are in pandemic, that cannot be averted. But what we can do is a corrective control and more, approach towards it. So, as the answer outlines over here, A, preventive controls are those that avert the problems before they arise. Backup tapes cannot be used to prevent damages for the files and therefore cannot be classified as a preventive control. Management controls modify and processing systems, which is completely irrelevant to this context. C, a corrective control helps to correct or minimize the impact of a problem. Backup tapes are such. So, detective controls, again, that is not completely relevant to this answer, which is going to only help in terms of, detecting a problem after it has arisen. So, detective controls can be an auditing. Auditing is a detective control. Best detecting control is an auditing. And a management control is something, if I can give an example, in terms of, recurrence of a problem. I mean, processing system, say for an example, that's It is management controls again. The management controls are put in place so that you cannot edit few items, view only options, and those kind of controls are also called as a management control. That is to repeat the occurrence of a problem so that nobody even touches something so that it doesn't go wrong again. Okay, so this is the end of domain 1. So now we are going into the domain 2. So now we are able to see the domain 2 first question, right? So in order for the management to effectively monitor and compliance of the processes, applications, which of the following would be the most ideal? A central document repository, a knowledge management system, a dashboard, and a benchmarking. So the correct answer is C, dashboard. So dashboard provides a set of information to illustrate compliance of the processes, like how KARIs, KPIs are going to be there, and the configurable elements to keep the enterprise on course, right? So if you are going to deviate, if the metrics is not achieved, so the management will be definitely informed. Okay, so why not A, B, and D? Any perspective again that is given over here, right? I mean, in terms of benchmarking, option D, it provides an information to help the management to adapt the organization in timely manner according to the trends and the environment. So what the other organization is doing. So if I'm in a big 4 organization, so what my peers are, I mean what my competitors are doing, EY, Deloitte, KPMG, and PwC, what they are going to do, and that will be the context in which I'll be benchmarking on, right? So and A and D. A is nothing but a document repository that doesn't provide any kind of specific information on how the controls are being performed, how the compliance is being done. A knowledge management system provides a valuable information, but it is generally not used by the management for compliance purpose. Again, KMS is nothing but in terms of it will not provide any specifics on how the control has been performing, how the compliance has been performing. So again, the important thing in this question is that effectively monitor and the most ideal. So when I say most ideal, I think benchmarking and the dashboard is the 2 options which I will be choosing in the last. But again, among these C and D, what is an important thing will be the D, because it gives accurate information on how my organization is doing. But the next question will be, okay, my organization is doing good, but what about rest of the others? That is where the benchmarking comes into the picture. Okay, the next question is, which of the following best describes the IT department strategic planning process? An IT department will have either short and long range plans depending upon organization's broader plans and objectives. IT department strategic plan must be time, project, and oriented, so that detailed try to address and help determine priorities to meet the business needs. Long-range planning for IT department should recognize the organizational goals, technological advances, and regulatory requirements. And D will be, short-range planning for the IT department does not need to be integrated to the short-range plans of the organization, since technological advances will drive the IT organization's plans much quicker than the organization plans. I think this is a little bit complicated questions, but the answer is very, very simple. So in order for this to understand, the correct answer is of course C. So in order for you to understand this particular question, you need to understand 2 things over here. You need to understand what is a strategic planning refers to. A strategic planning is always a long-term plan which is more than, it has been more than 1 year and, derived for 5 years. So that is a strategic planning. There is always a tactical planning. Tactical planning refers to what you are going to achieve in 1 year. And operational planning, it is anything below 1 year. I mean, for a few months, for a few quarters, that is going to be an operational planning. So what happens here is the question specifically asked about strategic planning. In that context, option A or B is, going to be, definitely eliminated, because option A talks about short and long range. Short-term plans are either going to be operational or tactical plans, which is not in this context of this question. And again, D is again eliminated because of the short-range planning, because short-range planning is again going to be only there for the operational and tactical and not for the strategic. So the only answer that remains in this question will be a long-range planning, which should always emphasize on organizational goals, technological advancement, and regulatory requirements. So that is in terms with this correct answer. Again, you need to understand one thing before answering a question. Whenever you have a question, try to understand which domain they are coming in primarily. There might be a situation of 2 or 3 domains culminating in one question itself, but there will be a primary essence of one domain which will be focused. In this particular question, the domain focus is only, of course it is domain 2 and the focus is domain 2. The domain 2 focuses only on one bang on agenda. That is, in terms of, organization goals, organization's missions, organization's thing. So everything that the IT revolves, IT cannot work as a silo, right? It cannot work as a silo. Say for an example, if your organization is selling vegetables and fruits, your IT organization cannot talk about implementing a cloud for clients, right? So that is not going to happen. So that is not the way the business runs, right? Your optimization should run in terms of how your organization is going to sell your fruits and vegetables, like they will be in organic business, so how an IT acts as an enabler. So IT is only an enabler of the organization. It is not something which is completely driving the organization. The business priorities are completely different from what IT priorities are. So we need to align our IT priorities so that the organizational goals, technological advancement, and even the regulatory requirements are complied with. So the most important responsibility of data security officer in an organization is A. Recommending and monitoring data security policies. B. Promoting security awareness within the organization. Establishing IT procedures for IT security policies. Administering physical and logical access controls. The answer is A. But when I come to this question, this is again a tricky question, because the the question outlines the most important, right? So when we say most important, there is always considered that, there are 2 options which is correct, 2 or more options which is correct for these questions. But in terms of, B, C and D, why it is not correct is that, B, anybody in the organization can do the security awareness. And it is not the only responsibility of a data security officer, though it might be a responsibility, but it is not the only responsibility. And C and D, they are all more of, establishing procedures, right? Establishing procedures anybody can do in an IT organization. And administering and physical and logical access control, again, specific to the application. Say for an example, if they are administering the SAP, if they are administering the Oracle, the specific team related to the SAP or the Oracle will administer these controls and not the data security officer. But data security officer in a top level, at a very high level, they will define in terms of what is recommended in terms of protecting their data. Say for an example, if the data is coming for the GDPR regulation, so what is that is required in terms of them to protect the particular data. Mere implementation part is done by the IT team, and in terms of promoting the security awareness, it can be done by anybody in the organization. Okay, now we go to the next question. What is considered most critical element for the successful implementation of information security program? An effective enterprise risk management framework, senior management commitment, an adequate scheduling, budgeting process, so meticulous program planning. So the correct answer is B, and you can go through this options why the other options are not correct. Let me just give you one important perspective over here. A couple of years back, when IT was not seen as a big enabler for the organizations, in the board meetings, only 5 minutes will be spared for any kind of security or IT security related issues to be discussed. Nowadays, organizations have started prioritizing this, and there is a very detailed discussion on, the whole thing, because most of the organizations, including the small scale enterprises or the medium scale enterprises, have shifted their focus only towards an IT because of the pandemic, and they have started even seeing the benefits out of it. And it is important for an organization to protect their assets, information security assets, and management has started putting a lot of efforts in terms of how this is going to happen. The next question is, which of the following tasks may be performed by the same person in a well-controlled information processing computer center? Security administrator and change management, computer operations and system development and change management, system development and system maintenance. The correct answer is actually D. Okay. The whole point of this question is that when you look at the option A and option C and option B, okay, why it is not correct is that the first option, security administration and change management. So what is change management, right? So change management is in terms of, there is a established change management process saying that, whenever you apply any changes to a particular system or a functionality, hardening or anything of that sort, any functionality for that matter, it needs to be promoted in a certain set manner by having an approval and everything. But when the person is having security administration as a task and having a change management, they will be completely bypassing this into the whole thing, and people will not be able to know who has done that particular change, and there are chances of malpractices. And C, again, the same thing, right? You develop a system and you're responsible also for the change management is again a conflict, right? So change management, somebody has to promote the change, somebody has to develop the changes, somebody has to approve the changes, somebody has to promote the changes into the production. So you cannot develop and also you cannot change at the same time. That is again a very important thing. So option B, the computer operations and system development. So the option D and B are little bit closely related. That is where the confusion starts over here. Because as many of you have told, the options computer operations refers to just the operations and the system development, because it would be computer operations and system development is incorrect choice, because this would make it possible for an operator to run a program that she or he has amended. So say for an example, if the particular person is having both these access, they can run the program without having any kind of additional controls being required. So that is the problem, that the operations and the system development cannot be at the same time. But option D, the maintenance can be done by the same person. Why it can be done by the same person is that during the maintenance, the person requires access to the source code, and the person who has developed it will be having access to the source code. That is why in the production they can and that is the reason they can promote these things into maintenance as well as system development at the same place. But again, this is a very tricky question. Exam question can be similar to this one. And the domain 2, the next question is, which of the following is most critical control over database administration, which is the DBA, approval of DBA activities, segregation of duties in regard to the rights and access, granting and revoking of access logs and review of access logs and activities, review of use of database tools. So the correct answer is option B. So why it is important for a DBA to do this SOD conflicting rather than any of these three is that other three option does not reduce the risk, right? This is the only preventative control that I can apply, right? So as an auditor, when I am coming and seeing the process and saying that the DBA is reviewing the logs, the DBA is using the database files, the DBA is using approval activities, everything is fine. But does he or she deliver on the fundamental issue in the segregation of duties? That is what will be my auditor's question. This is where it is very important, because as an IS auditor, you need to think and deliver the answer. Because if you are thinking as a security analyst, this was a typical security mind question and answer. Okay, I understand from Guru's perspective, he is right. But as an auditor, you need to think from the other side of the table, how an auditor will approach this thing. That is where this question is going to be answered. You can just read the A, C and D, right? Why they are not correct. So approval of a database administration activities does not prevent the combination of conflicting things. Okay. And if C option is if DBA activities are improperly approved, review of access would be, again, that may not be reducing the risk. Say for an example, if you have fundamentally approved the access of some person incorrectly, though you may be monitoring his or her activities, but the problem is that it will not be addressed because you have already done something wrong in the first place, and you cannot correct it just by monitoring or taking actions of that. And reviewing of the use of database tools does not reduce the risk because it is only a detective tool. It is only a detective tool. It's not a preventive or any other conflicting combination. It will not prevent any conflicting combination. In a small organization where a segregation of duties is not practical, an employee performs the function of computer operator and application programmer. Which of the following controls should the IS auditor recommend? Automated logging of changes and development libraries, additional staff to provide SOD, procedures that verify only approved program changes are implemented, access controls to prevent operator from making program modifications. Again, this is one of our trickiest question. The whole point is that, whenever you see some questions relating to the organization size, even in the exam, make it very clear that, the answer might be dependent upon the size of the organization. If you are a large organization like, Google or Apple or Facebook, you can do any of these things, right? B can be done, A can be done. Of course, D is something, that also can be considered. But it is a small organization, only a programmer is dependent upon an operator, performing the multiple tasks. What an IS auditor would recommend will be very, very simple in terms of, preventing, procedures that, that exist at least in paper to say that, only the approved program changes are implemented. Because whenever we see, any size relating to the any question relating to the organization size, the answers will be highly dependent on the size of the organization. What might be the best fitment for a large size organization may not be the best fitment for a mid-size and a small size organization. So we need to be very careful in choosing the answer, because two or more options will look extremely correct, because the size of the organization is going to be very dependent on a particular question. We are end of domain 2 and we'll be having 3 more domains to cover. So the next question is from domain 3. To assist in testing an essential banking system being acquired, an organization has been provided the vendor with sensitive data from its existing production system. As an IS auditor, the primary concern that the data should be what? A, sanitized, B, complete, C, representative, and D, current. Whenever an asset goes out, even if an asset is sunsetting, if a technology asset decommissioning is happening, the sanitization part is an important thing, right? You don't want the data or the production data to be visible to others whenever they are doing the testing, which might give some opinions about how the organization is working and what are all the data that the organization is having. So it is important that, we need definitely should be opting for A, because it is very important. And test data should be sanitized to prevent sensitive data from leaking to unauthorized persons. All the other 3 options, though it may seem little bit relevant, but it is completely not relevant. It is completely incorrect. Which of the following is the primary purpose for conducting parallel testing? To determine whether the system is cost effective, to enable comprehensive unit and system testing, to highlight the errors in the program interfaces with the files, to ensure the new system meets the user requirements. It's very simple, right? The answer is D. Let me put a perspective over here. So when we have two systems, say for an example, we have a tally system that's running currently my accounts of accounting things, and we are going to implement SAP, right? So tally is perfect for my organization, but my organization is going into a billion and a trillion organization. I wish it could. And the whole thing is that, right? So in terms with, if the new system is being implemented, is everything is being aligned, and is everything is as per the requirement, is everything working as it was working in tally? That is the primary thing that I will be looking at it, right? So that is the reason that we are going with the option D. The purpose of the parallel testing is to ensure that the implementation of new system will meet the user requirements. It can be identified in the UAT testing itself, but the parallel testing gives you an idea, both the systems are running in parallel with each other. Will give a fair enough understanding on, how the new system is working. In case if there are any deficiencies in the new system compared to the old system, how it can be fixed and stuff like that. See, all the other testings, unit and system testings are completed before the parallel testing. Program interfaces to the files are tested for errors during the system testing itself and not in the parallel testing, because parallel testing, happens at the last stage during the implementation stage, and it's not at the first stage. When conducting a review of the business re-engineering process, an IS auditor found that an important preventive control had been removed. In this case, an IS auditor should A. inform the management of the finding and determine whether the management is willing to accept the risk potential. B. determine if a detective control has been replaced the preventive control during the process. And C. recommended that all the controls procedures have existed before the process was re-engineered and included in the new process. Develop continuous audit approach and to monitor the effects of removal of the preventive control. Whatever happens, when you stumble upon something that is not, what is as expected, you are supposed to inform the management then and now. then look for the other alternatives or other remedial measures, because the management needs to be informed that there is a risk and whether they are willing to accept this risk of not having a preventive control in place. So in this case, that's a classic example. And if you see here, the existence of a detective control instead of a preventive control usually increases the risk that the management increases the risk that the material problem may occur. So say for an example, if there is also a detective control, that should be in place. There is a high probability that the particular process is prone to having some kind of a control issues, and the preventive control that has been removed. So that is the reason, you need to just inform the management at the first and then look for other options. Is it clear? Okay, let me go to the next question, which is, which of the following would be considered as the most serious in an enterprise resource planning software used by financial organization? Access controls have not been reviewed, limited documentation is available, 2-year backup tapes have not been replaced, database backups are performed once a day. Give you the correct answer, which is A, and you can see the explanation. When auditing the requirements phase of a software acquisition, an IS auditor should assess the responsibility of the project timetable, assess the vendor's proposed quality processes, ensure that the best software package is acquired, review the completeness of the specification. The review of the completeness of the specifications. Whenever you talk about requirements, there is a specification, right? So that is what the answer talks about. The purpose of the requirements phase is to specify the functionality of the proposed system. Therefore, an IS auditor would concentrate more on the completeness of the specification. Assessing vendor quality process would come after the requirements. So, you have analyzed the requirements. Then you are going for the vendor. This A vendor or B vendor. That is where your things will come into the picture. Analyzing the organization's ability, whether they are able to support, whether they are a big organization like a Microsoft or Oracle, or they are a small organization like something happening out of somewhere in the world, whether they are able to fulfill the obligations, whether the quality process is good, and everything. So this is how you critically think, because this is a stepped approach, right? As I told, if there is a stepped approach in some process, say for an example, change management, how do you promote the changes? I think the CISA CRM gives you a very detailed explanation on how the changes are being promoted, change management, and how RFP is raised. In the domain 3, it talks about the RFPs, how a software is being acquired, how off the shelf software is being acquired, how the requirements are built, how the requisition for proposal is built. So these kind of things are phased approaches, and you have to bound the answer only to the phased approaches. So the next question is, an organization decides to purchase a software package instead of developing it. In such case, the design and development phases of a traditional software development cycle would be replaced with selection and configuration phases, feasibility and requirements phases, implementation and testing phases. Nothing as replacement is not required. It's a very simple question. Just now I told about the steps involved, right? This question, the option A is the correct answer, because of the fact that, the design element is taken out. It is, instead of developing it, you're going to buy outside, right? So what happens is the selection and the configuration phases come into the picture. Feasibility and the requirements comes only in terms of design requirements. So if you see the answer reasoning over here, with a purchased package software, design and development phases of a traditional life cycle have become replaceable with selection and configuration phases. A request for proposal form, which is the RFP I was talking about, form the supplier package good is called for, evaluated against the predefined criteria for selection before a decision is made to purchase the software. Thereafter, the configuration is to meet with the organization's requirement. If you take the option B, the other phases of the system development SDLC, such as feasibility study, requirements definition, implementation, and post-implementation remain unaltered. Because it is very simple. So you're not going to define any requirements. Say for an example, if I'm going to Subway, I'm going to say very clearly that, you need to put me these toppings like jalapenos. I don't want to trigger any kind of hunger mood over here, but I'm just telling for an example over here, because this is as simple as going to a Subway versus McDonald's, right? So if I go to Subway, I customize my bread along with my, the toppings that I require. These are the sausages, these are the toppings that I require. But if I go to a McD, that is very clear that they have a predefined elements, and among the predefined things, what is closely matching with my requirements, I need to choose. Probably I can customize it. I can say that, please don't add mushrooms. I don't like mushrooms. I can say that. That is to do the configuration part. But again, I cannot completely design some new product and the requirements and the feasibility, everything is being taken off the shelf. Which of the following procedures should be implemented to help to ensure completeness of inbound transactions via electronic data interchange? I think the EDI topic you will be seeing quite a lot in the CRM as well as sometimes in the exams as well. So this is a hint. So segment counts to built-in transactions set earlier. A log of a number of messages received periodically verified at the transaction originator. An electronic audit trail of accountability and tracking. Matching the acknowledgement transactions received to the log of EDI messages sent. The EDA is one of my favorite topics, I would say, because like while I was studying for the exams, I did a very hard work to understand this EDA concept. So all the other options, if you see one way or the other, talks about some form of auditing methodologies, right? An acknowledgement of transactions received. Acknowledgement of transactions is, just to verify whether it has been originated or to check the origination of that particular transaction. An electronic audit trail is an accountability and tracking. Yes, of course, it tracks the audit trail, for accountability and tracking. But none of the options are actually close to A, because A is the correct answer. Controls total built into the trailer record of each transactions or each segment is the only option that will ensure that individual transactions sent are received complete. So, electronic data interchange is one concept that you need to be very, very familiar with, because EDI is being used at every ERP, everything that you see in the current system. Because if one system is talking, say for an example, if SMAT is talking to Oracle or JD Edwards or any other things for that matter, they are talking in the language of EDI with an XML file. So each transaction that is being sent as an inbound transaction and sent as an outbound transaction from one system to another system, they need to have an individual count and they need to have an individual receipt of transaction. That is the reason, why we need to match it accordingly. Let me move on to the next question. So that ends the domain 3 and we are now into domain 4. So the domain 4 starts, I think the domain 4 is all about the information security assets, right? Different types of information security assets and BCP and DRP, right? So which one of the following provides the best method for determining the level of performance by similar information processing facility environments? User satisfaction, B, goal accomplishment, C, benchmarking, and D, capacity and growth planning. So it is actually the C, benchmarking, because whenever we wanted to ascertain any level of performance, we talked about dashboards. Dashboards gives us what our organization is performing, and in terms of what the other organizations are doing, the best way to identify is to benchmark. Say for an example, I'm working in a big four and I want to ascertain the value of what others are doing, what I am doing compared to others. The only thing that we need to do is the benchmarking, right? So that is very important that we do the benchmarking among our competitors and similar facility environments. Let me move on to the next slide. So which one of the following is the most effective method for IS auditor to use in testing the program change management process? Trace from system generated information to the change management documentation. Examine change management documentation for the evidence of accuracy. Trace from change management documentation to a system generated audit trail. Examine change management documentation for evidence of completeness. So this is a very tricky question again. The correct answer is A, trace from system generated information to the change management documentation. They are talking about most effective method. Okay. In by virtue of saying that most effective method, two options are correct. A and C are extremely correct. Okay. B and D are extremely incorrect because of the fact that, when you check the documentation only, you cannot derive any accuracy out of it, derive any completeness out of it. So B and D, D is a straight elimination. But what happens with the A and C is that when you do it from the documentation perspective and then go to the system audit trial, it is still correct. It is still correct, and some of the auditors do still practice that. But what happens is, you sometimes miss the perspective out of it. And your mind starts to think, why, a specific thing that we will start thinking, it needs to be there. But when you extract the system generated information and then check with the documentation whether this is the correct way of doing things or wrong or not, then that is the most probable factor you will stumble upon any gaps. So when testing the change management, IS auditor should always start with the system generated evidences, information containing the date and time module last it was updated, and trace it back to the documentation authorizing it. Because see, it is like finding a needle in a haystack, right? So what happens is, for every transaction you need to have an approval. It is not like for every transaction approval whether there is a corresponding system entry or not. Some might have even not been deployed, right? So what happens is, the risk of not detecting undocumented changes. That is what is the problem here is. Because whatever is there in the documentation is documented and it is fine. That is the difference between C and A, right? The classification based on the criticality of a software application is a part of IS business activity continuity plan, determined by the nature of the business and the value of the application to the business, replacement cost of the application, vendor support available for the application, associated threats and vulnerabilities of the application. So the correct answer is A. So the nature of the business and the value of the application towards the business, right? So rest of the other options seems little bit irrelevant to this question, right? Replacement cost of the application. So why it is even important, to understand. And the vendor support is not a relevant factor because determining the criticality classification. The associated threats and vulnerabilities will be evaluated only if the application is deemed to be critical to the business. So rest of the other options are not correct. Okay, the next question is, when conducting an audit of a client server database security, the IS auditor should be most concerned about the availability of system utilities, application program generators, system security documentation, access to stored procedures. So the whole point is, availability of what? So the point is, system security documentation, of course it is required. The problem here is that it should be required only for a few specific set of people whom the organization wants to give the access to the documentation. Not every junior level employee cannot have the security documentation in place. And B is completely irrelevant because application program generators, it's not. In the correct shop, actually the correct option is option A. System utilities. System utilities may enable unauthorized changes to be made to the data on a client server model, because if you read the database model very clearly, there are certain system utilities you should not give access to. Because the system utilities will bypass the security controls and the access controls, and they will still have the organization, and the person will be still having ability to make some unauthorized changes. People who have read the database security model, I think they will be clear with this answer, because the fundamental thing is that system utilities, say for an example, that is the reason why we do the hardening of the system, right? We will delete access to the unwanted things that is not required as a part of the system. Okay, let me move on to the next question. When reviewing a network used for internet connections, an IS auditor will first examine the what? Validity of the password changes occurrence, architecture of the client server application, network architecture design, firewall protection and proxy servers. So I think unanimously people are answering for C, right? I mean, that is the correct answer as well. Because you need to understand what a network architecture and design is all about, that particular communication, right? Though B may seem little bit relevant to this particular thing, because firewall comes after the whole thing of understanding network architecture, and B is also the second, but it's not as the first important thing. See, I'll tell you the difference between C and D. Understanding the network architecture design is starting point of identifying various layers of the security architecture across the various layers, such as client server application. But in principle, what we need to do is, the first step, we need to understand the network architecture as a whole. Then you go to the client server model, how it is designed. That is how you need to take things. Again, this is a step-based approach, like, how you approach BCP, DRP, and change management. This is again a step-based approach. Data mirroring should be implemented as a recovery strategy when RPO is low, RPO is high, RPO is high, disaster tolerance is high? This is a very easy question. If you have understood the concept of RPO or RPO, this is a very easy question. So the correct answer is RPO, A, which is low. So recovery time, recovery point objective is the earliest when in the point in which it is acceptable to recover. So recover the data. In other words, RPO indicates the age of recovered data. And so what happens is the organization cannot afford to lose even a few minutes of data. In such case, data mirroring should be usually used as a recovery strategy. So I think one of the last questions with domain 4 will be, which of the following components of business continuity plan primarily responsible for organizational size department? Developing the business continuity plan, selecting and approving the recovery strategies used for business continuity plan, declaring a disaster, restoring the IT systems and data after disaster. Following components of primarily the responsibility of the organization's IS department, primarily. So when you say the primarily, what is the primarily objective of the IS department in relation with the business continuity plan? To restore the data is very, very important, right? At the end of the day, what is the end game of that? Whenever a disaster struck, okay, the disasters are also has already struck. Okay, fine. What we are going to do now? Now we are going to temporarily run the business on the other show with the backups and stuff like that, with the skeletal staff, whatever. But maybe the primary objective is that, it is always to restore the IT systems and data after disaster. That is what is the answer correct and possible. You can see the explanation over here. Members of the organization, senior management are primarily responsible for overseeing the development of the business continuity plan and are accountable for the results. So IS team is not responsible for that. It is the business and the senior management who is responsible for that because that's their business. Okay, management is also accountable for selecting and approving other strategies. That is again to do with the individual business. Okay, cool. So that brings me to the domain 5. The most technical domain, right, if I'm not wrong. The longest domain in the book as well. Okay, the first question is, as an IS auditor is reviewing the configuration of a signature-based intrusion detection system, which is the IDS, would be the most concerned if which of the following is discovered. Auto update is turned off, scanning for application vulnerabilities is disabled, analysis of encrypted data packets are disabled, IDS is placed between a demilitarized zone on the firewall. A, auto update is turned off, right? So even in our home, right, when we are running Kaspersky, Norton or whatever security thing, the intrusion, not intrusion, but antivirus software, the signature is very important, right? It will get updated twice or thrice or even 5 times in a day, depending upon, what is the signature. So what happens is, when you have turned this off, God knows when you have turned it off and how many days the system is not updated. That is the most important risk in anything whenever the IDS, because when a signature-based IDS is looking for patterns and the pattern is not recently updated for a recent vulnerability, what happens? Your system is as good as it is not protected. Whenever you are reading this answer reasoning, right, even in the CRM, even in the question and answers bank, I request you all to read all the 4 options, why it is correct, why it is not correct, and to get familiarized. Say for an example, in this, the complete irrelevant option is D, but they have given a good information on a demilitarized zone, right, DMZ. So this can be used in some other question which might be you are dealing with DMZ. Okay, let me move on to the next question. An IS auditor has just completed a review of organization that is mainframe computer and 2 database servers where all the production data reside. Okay, which one of the following weakness should the IS auditor be concerned the most serious? The security officer also serves as a database administrator. Password controls are not administered over 2 database servers. There is no business continuity plan for the mainframe system's non-critical applications. Most local data networks do not have backup file server fixed disk regularly. So the correct answer is B. Password controls are not administered over 2 database servers. So the absence of password controls on the 2 database servers where the production data resides is the most critical weakness. Again, this question talks about the most, right? There are 2 options which is correct, of course. And what we need to look for is, the one which is most apt, in this given the situation in the scenario. Okay, so let me go on to the next question. The insurance company is using the public cloud computing for one of its critical applications to reduce the cost. Which of the following would be the most concern to the IS auditor? The inability to recover the service in a major technical failure scenario, the data in shared environment being accessed by other companies, the service provider not including investigative support for incidents, the long-term viability of the service if the provider goes out of business. So that is actually the correct answer, James. Considering that an insurance company must be preserve the privacy and confidentiality of the customer information, unauthorized access to the information and the data leakage are the two major concerns. Okay, the next question. Which one of the following is the best determines whether the complete encryption or the authentication protocol for protecting information while being transmitted exists? A digital signature with the RSA that has been implemented. Work is being done in the tunnel mode, registered with the services of AH, which is the authentication header, and encapsulation security payload, which is the ESP. Digital certificates with the RSA being used. Work is being done in transport mode with the nested services of AH and ESP. Quite a tricky technical question, I would say. And to remind you, I have studied these things quite cumbersomely because I didn't even understand a single word when I was doing it the first time. Transport mode, tunnel mode, everything was, Greek and Latin for me. B is the correct answer. Tunnel mode provides encryption and authentication of complete IP package, including, the authentication header and encapsulation security payload, which is ESP. But transport mode provides only at higher layers, right? Like data fields and the payload of an IP package. So those are the two differences. Actually, as I told, a digital certificate provides only the authentication and integrity. It doesn't provide anything beyond that. And whenever you see any digital signature versus encryption, I think digital signature is only, or digital certificate is only to provide an authentication. It doesn't provide any other thing. It doesn't provide even confidentiality. It doesn't provide any, availability or any of the thing. Okay, which one of the following characterizes distributed denial of service attack, DDoS? Okay, central initiation of intermediary computers to direct simultaneous attacks, surplus message traffic and specific target site. Local initiation of intermediary computers to direct simultaneous and spurious message traffic at specific target. Central initiation of primary computer to detect spurious message traffic at multiple sites, and local initiation of intermediary computers to detect direct staggered spurious message traffic at a specific target site. Again, this is a confusing question, but the answer is very simple. That is the correct answer as well. So what happens with the DDoS attack is that, one controller system or one primary system will be, controlling so many zombie computers, and the administrator will launch an attack, and these zombie computers will start sending packets to the primary target, and by flooding their traffic, and they will be having some kind of issue. Say for an example, if Amazon is putting a Independence Day sale, I want to affect their sales by, targeting their servers. I can launch these attacks using the zombie computers, and they will attack on behalf of me, and I'll be controlling these zombie computers, and what happens next is, God knows. So again, DDoS attacks are not locally initiated, they are not staggered, they are not initiated using a primary computer. So last question for this day. Okay, which of the following is the most effective preventive antivirus control? Scanning the emails attachment on the mail server, restoring the systems from clean copies, disabling universal serious bus ports, which is the USB, an online antivirus scan with the up-to-date antivirus definitions. Correct answer is actually D. But why not C, B and A? E is completely irrelevant, right? I mean, it doesn't talk anything about antivirus or anything, because it's just restoring systems from clean copies, which is most baseline thing that we do. And disabling USB. I think disabling USB should be an incorrect option again. You can disable USB, but still system can read the USB file when it is having malicious intent. So D would be the most appropriate answer for this one, because of the fact that, so antivirus can be used to prevent virus attacks. By running regular scans, it can also means detect virus infections that have already been occurred. Regular updates of the software is required to ensure it is able to update, detect and correct viruses as they emerge. So again, the important thing that you need to know is that, the signature based system is always, it should be kept up to date. But not a heuristic, not, knowledge based system. Sometimes, you'll be having a conflict between, heuristic and signature based and all those stuffs. You need to be very clear which system talks about what, because some systems like IDPs which talks about the anomalies, it will not talk about system, signature. It will talk about only the anomalies. Say for an example, these anomalies will be studied for certain dates, so that the regular traffic will be like this, and anything beyond this regular traffic will be flagged as a, incorrect traffic or the non-relevant traffic, and it will be, quarantined, and it will not be allowed intrusion detection system, and sometimes it can be prevented from entering our servers as well. So that brings me to the end of this session. Thanks a lot, everybody. I'll wind up the session. Thank you for your patience and listening to me. And it was a very fruitful session. I appreciate.